The gunshot cracked through the frozen November air, and Louisa Ravenwood felt her horse stumble beneath her before she even understood what was happening. She hit the hard Texas ground with a force that knocked the wind from her lungs, her carpetbag spilling its meager contents across the dirt road. The night was dark as ink, clouds covering whatever moon might have offered light, and the temperature had dropped so suddenly that afternoon that half the folks in Johnson City had been caught unprepared. Louisa was one of them. She had left Austin 3 days ago, wearing her wool traveling dress and a thin shawl, never imagining that the unseasonable cold front sweeping down from the north would turn the usually mild Texas prairie into something that felt like the depths of winter. Her horse, spooked by the gunfire rather than hit, had bolted into the darkness, leaving her alone on the road 5 miles outside of Johnson City. It was November 1882, and Louisa had been traveling to take a teaching position at the small schoolhouse, her first real job since finishing her education in Austin. Now she lay on the cold ground, her ears ringing, trying to figure out which direction the shot had come from. She scrambled to her knees, gathering her scattered belongings with shaking hands. A hairbrush, a small leather-bound Bible her mother had given her, a daguerreotype of her parents who had died of fever 2 years ago, a few letters of reference. Her fingers were already going numb in the bitter cold. She had no gloves, no coat heavier than her shawl, and no idea who had just fired at her or why. Another shot rang out, this one clearly aimed toward the hills to her left. Not at her, she realized. Someone was shooting at someone else, and she had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her horse disappearing into the night suddenly seemed like a very serious problem. The cold was already seeping through her dress, and she knew from the stories she had heard that November nights in Texas could occasionally turn deadly when the northers swept through. Louisa forced herself to her feet, clutching her carpetbag to her chest. The road stretched in both directions, equally dark and unwelcoming. Johnson City lay ahead, but 5 miles in this cold in the dark seemed impossible. Behind her was nothing but empty prairie and eventually Austin, days away. She started walking, because stopping meant freezing, and she was already shivering so hard her teeth chattered. The wind picked up, cutting through her dress like it was made of paper. She wrapped her shawl tighter, but it did almost nothing. Her fingers ached, then burned, then started to go numb. She stumbled over a rut in the road and nearly fell again. How long had she been walking? 15 minutes? An hour? Time seemed to stretch and contract in the darkness. She could not feel her toes anymore. That was when she heard the horse approaching. Louisa froze, her heart hammering. The gunshots had stopped some time ago, but that did not mean safety. This was wild country still, despite the towns and ranches that were slowly civilizing it. Outlaws, drifters, men who would not think twice about taking advantage of a woman alone on a dark road. She looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the landscape offered nothing except low scrub brush. The horse and rider materialized out of the darkness like a ghost. Louisa took a step back, clutching her bag like a shield. "Easy there," a man's voice called out, low and steady. "I am not going to hurt you." The rider pulled his horse to a stop about 10 feet away, and Louisa could just barely make out his silhouette. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. He sat his horse like he was born to it. "You all right, miss?" he asked. There was genuine concern in his voice, but Louisa had learned not to trust easily. "I am fine," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the shivering that racked her whole body. "My horse bolted. I am walking to Johnson City, in this cold, without a coat." The rider shifted in his saddle. "Begging your pardon, miss, but that is a good way to die." I did not exactly plan for this, Louisa shot back, her fear making her sharp. Someone started shooting, my horse ran off, and here I am. That would have been the Hendricks boys, the man said grimly. They tried to rustle some cattle from the Graham place. I work for the Graham Ranch. Name is Lucas Garrett. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that would have been polite in daylight. I can take you into town if you trust me enough to ride. Louisa hesitated. Every story she had ever heard about what happened to women who trusted the wrong men flickered through her mind. But she could not feel her hands anymore, and her legs were shaking so badly she was not sure how much longer she could walk. The cold was going to kill her if she stayed out here. At least with this Lucas Garrett, she had a chance. "All right," she said finally. He dismounted in one smooth motion and walked toward her. As he got closer, she could see a bit more of him in the darkness. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with a strong jaw and eyes that seemed kind even in the poor light. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and moved with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his life working hard. "You are shaking like a leaf," he observed, and before she could respond, he was shrugging out of his heavy canvas duster. "Here." "I could not," Louisa started to protest, but he was already draping the coat around her shoulders. The warmth that enveloped her was immediate and overwhelming. The coat smelled like leather and wood smoke and horse, and it hung down past her knees. She pulled it tight around herself, feeling like she might cry from the relief of it. "Thank you," she whispered. "No need for thanks," Lucas said. "Can you ride, or do you need to sit in front?" Louisa's pride warred with her practical nature. She could ride, but she was so cold and shaky that she was not sure she could manage it safely in the dark. "In front might be better," she admitted. He nodded and picked up her carpet bag, securing it to his saddle. Then he mounted his horse, a big bay gelding, and reached down to her. "Give me your hand." She placed her numb hand in his, and he pulled her up in front of him with an ease that spoke of considerable strength. She found herself sitting sideways across the saddle, his arm around her to keep her steady. It was improper, being this close to a man she had just met, but propriety seemed less important than survival at the moment. "Hold on," he said quietly, and urged the horse into a walk. They rode in silence for a while. Louisa gradually stopped shivering as the coat and Lucas's body heat warmed her. She could feel the solid strength of him behind her, smell the same scent that clung to his coat. He held the reins with one hand and kept his other arm firmly around her waist, keeping her secure but not taking any liberties. She found herself relaxing slightly despite the strangeness of the situation. "You said you were going to Johnson City," he asked after a while. "You have family there?" "No," Louisa said. "I am supposed to start teaching at the school. I came from Austin. Long way to travel alone." "I am alone in the world," she said simply. "My parents died 2 years ago. I finished my education and got the teaching position. It seemed like a good opportunity." "Teaching is hard work in these parts," Lucas observed. "The kids are good kids mostly, but some of them are pretty rough around the edges. Ranch children, you know. They spend more time on horseback than in school. You sound like you know them." "I grew up here," he said. "Went to that same schoolhouse when I was a boy. Miss Peterson was the teacher then. She was about 100 years old and mean as a snake, but she taught us to read and cipher, so I guess she did her job." Louisa found herself smiling despite everything. "I hope I can do half as well." "You will do fine," Lucas said with a certainty that surprised her. "Anyone brave enough to travel all this way alone has got plenty of grit." They fell silent again, and Louisa became aware of how tired she was. The fear and cold had drained her, and now that she was warm and safe, exhaustion crept over her like a blanket. Her head began to droop, and she caught herself before she could lean against Lucas's chest. "It is all right," he said softly. You can rest. I have got you." Something in his voice, warm and steady and completely trustworthy, made her believe him. She let her head rest against his shoulder and closed her eyes just for a moment. When she opened them again, there were lights ahead. Johnson City was small, maybe 300 people, but to Louisa it looked like salvation. Lucas guided his horse down the main street, past the general store and the saloon and the church, to a white two-story house with a neat picket fence. "Mrs. Henderson runs the boarding house," he explained. "She is expecting you, I think. She told me last week that the new teacher would be arriving soon." He dismounted and then carefully lifted Louisa down. Her legs were unsteady, and he kept his hands on her waist until she had her balance. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him. In the light spilling from the boarding house windows, she could see him clearly for the first time. He had dark hair that needed a trim, strong features, and gray eyes that studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way that spoke of hard work and outdoor living. "You should keep the coat," he said. "It is still cold." "I cannot keep your coat," Louisa protested. "You will freeze." "I've got another one back at the ranch, and besides, I am used to the cold. You are not." He smiled then, a slow smile that transformed his serious face. "Keep it, Miss Ravenwood. You might need it again. But how will I return it to you?" "I will come by to check on you in a few days," he said. "Make sure you settled in all right. You can give it back to me then if you really want to." Louisa clutched the coat tighter around her. It still held his warmth, and she was not quite ready to give that up yet. "All right. Thank you, Mr. Garrett. You quite possibly saved my life tonight." "Lucas," he corrected gently. "And you are welcome. Welcome to Johnson City, Miss Ravenwood." "Louisa," she said, "if we are using first names." He touched his hat brim in that same polite gesture, retrieved her carpet bag from his saddle and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed, and Louisa felt a strange little jolt at the contact. "Good night, Louisa," he said, and there was something in the way he said her name that made her pulse quicken. "Good night, Lucas." She watched him mount his horse and ride away into the darkness before she turned to the boarding house door. "Mrs. Henderson answered her knock almost immediately, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a welcoming smile. "Miss Ravenwood." "Oh, you poor dear, we were starting to worry." Come in out of the cold. I've got supper waiting and a fire in your room. What a dreadful night for traveling." Louisa let herself be swept inside, into warmth and light and safety. But as Mrs. Henderson chattered on about the town and the school and the other boarders, Louisa found her thoughts drifting back to the man who had found her on that dark road, Lucas Garrett. She pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders and wondered if he had meant what he said about coming by to check on her. She hoped he had. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the unseasonable weather holding steady. Louisa woke early in her small but comfortable room on the second floor of the boarding house. Someone, probably Mrs. Henderson, had unpacked her carpet bag and hung her 2 dresses in the wardrobe. Her brush and Bible sat on the small table by the window. She dressed in her gray wool dress, the warmer of her 2 options, and braided her dark blonde hair into a simple style. Lucas's coat hung on the back of the door. In the daylight, she could see it was well worn but well cared for, the canvas weathered to softness. She ran her fingers over it, remembering the warmth and safety of the night before. Downstairs, Mrs. Henderson had breakfast laid out in the dining room. 2 other boarders were already eating, a middle-aged man who worked at the bank and an elderly woman who was visiting her daughter. They introduced themselves as Mr. Porter and Mrs. Simmons. Both were friendly and curious about the new teacher. "The school is just 3 blocks down," Mrs. Henderson said as she poured Louisa coffee. "Mr. Jennings, He is the town mayor and also runs the general store. He will meet you there at 8 o'clock to show you around. The children start tomorrow, so you will have today to get settled and prepared." Louisa ate her breakfast of eggs and biscuits, her stomach fluttering with nervous anticipation. This was what she had worked toward for years, but suddenly it felt very real and rather intimidating. What if the children did not like her? What if she could not maintain order? What if she was not a good enough teacher? She pushed the doubts aside and finished her meal. At 7:45, she put on Lucas's coat, since she had nothing else warm enough, and walked to the schoolhouse. Johnson City in daylight was charming in a rough-hewn way. The buildings were mostly wood, weathered by sun and wind. The streets were dirt, and horses were tied up outside several establishments. People called out greetings to each other, and Louisa could feel curious eyes on her as she passed. The new teacher was clearly an object of interest. The schoolhouse was a simple white building with a small bell tower. Inside, it was one large room with rows of wooden desks, a blackboard at the front, and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. Mr. Jennings was waiting for her, a jovial man with an impressive mustache and a ready smile. "Miss Ravenwood, delighted to meet you. We are so pleased to have you. I must say, we were worried when you did not arrive yesterday afternoon as expected." "My horse bolted and ran off," Louisa explained. "Fortunately, Mr. Garrett from the Graham Ranch found me and brought me into town." Lucas Garrett. Good man, that one. Solid as they come. His family has ranched around here for 20 years. He is foreman at the Graham place now, even though he is young for it. But he has got the skill and the temperament for the work. Mr. Jennings showed her around the schoolhouse, pointing out where supplies were kept, explaining the schedule and the expectations. There would be about 25 students, he told her, ranging from 6 years old to 15. Some came from town, others from the surrounding ranches. Attendance was irregular, especially during planting and harvest times when the children were needed at home. "Do your best, Miss Ravenwood," Mr. Jennings said as he prepared to leave. "That is all we ask. These are good children, but they need a firm hand and a kind heart." "I think you have got both." Left alone in the schoolhouse, Louisa spent the rest of the morning organizing and planning. She wrote the alphabet on the blackboard in her careful script, arranged the books on the shelf, and made notes about what she would teach the first day. The work absorbed her, and she found her nervousness fading into excitement. This was going to be good. She was going to make it good. At lunchtime, she walked back to the boarding house, where Mrs. Henderson had soup and fresh bread waiting. That afternoon, she returned to the schoolhouse and continued preparing. By the time the sun started to set, she felt as ready as she could be. That evening, she joined Mrs. Henderson and the other boarders for supper. The conversation was pleasant, covering local news and gossip. Louisa learned that the Graham Ranch where Lucas worked was one of the largest in the area, running several thousand head of cattle. The owners, David and Martha Graham, were apparently well-respected and fair employers. Their son died in a riding accident 5 years ago, Mrs. Simmons said with the relish of someone who loved to share sad stories. Just 16 years old. Terrible tragedy. They never had other children, so they treat their workers like family now. That Lucas Garrett, they think the world of him. Louisa found herself hungry for any information about Lucas, though she told herself it was merely curiosity about the man who had helped her. "He is not married?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Lucas?" "No, though half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him," Mrs. Henderson said with a chuckle. "He is friendly enough, but he keeps to himself mostly. Works hard, minds his own business. He comes into town on Saturdays usually, plays cards at the saloon but never drinks too much, goes to church on Sunday. A good man, like Mr. Jennings said." That night, lying in her bed, Louisa found herself thinking about Lucas again. The way he had given her his coat without hesitation, the solid strength of him as they rode, the gentleness in his voice when he told her she could rest. She barely knew him, but something about him had touched her in a way she could not quite explain. She drifted off to sleep, still thinking about gray eyes and a slow smile. The next morning, Louisa woke with butterflies in her stomach. Her first day of teaching. She dressed carefully in her blue dress, pinned her hair up neatly, and ate a quick breakfast. She arrived at the schoolhouse half an hour early to make sure everything was perfect. The children started arriving at 8 o'clock. They came in groups and pairs, some walking from town, others dropped off by parents in wagons. They ranged from tiny 6-year-olds to gangly teenagers, and they all stared at Louisa with open curiosity. She stood at the front of the room, her heart pounding, and smiled at them. "Good morning. My name is Miss Ravenwood, and I am very pleased to be your teacher." The day was challenging but not terrible. The younger children were energetic and easily distracted. The older ones tested her authority in small ways, whispering to each other and taking their time to follow instructions. But Louisa had expected this. She was firm but kind, setting clear expectations and praising good behavior. By the end of the day, she felt like she had at least made a start at winning them over. She was tidying up the schoolhouse after the children left when she heard the door open behind her. She turned, expecting perhaps a parent with a question, and found Lucas standing in the doorway. He looked different in daylight, somehow both more real and more overwhelming. He was tall and broad and solid, wearing work clothes and boots, his hat in his hands. His dark hair was slightly mussed, and there was a day's worth of stubble on his jaw. "Lucas," she said, pleased by how steady her voice sounded despite her suddenly racing heart. "Hello, Louisa." He stepped into the schoolhouse, his gray eyes taking her in. "I wanted to check on you. Make sure you were settling in all right." "I am settling in very well, thank you. Today was my first day teaching." "How did it go?" "Good, I think. The children were lovely." She paused. "I still have your coat. It is at the boarding house. Let me return it to you." "No rush," he said easily. "Like I said, I have got another one. You keep it as long as you need it." They looked at each other for a long moment. Louisa felt something shift in the air between them, something electric and new. "Would you like to walk with me back to the boarding house?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Mrs. Henderson always has coffee on, and I suspect she would be happy for the company." Lucas smiled, that slow, transforming smile. "I would like that very much." They walked together through the cooling afternoon, their shoulders nearly touching. They talked easily about the town and the school and the weather, which was supposed to warm up again soon. But beneath the ordinary conversation, Louisa felt the hum of something more, a connection that seemed to have been forged in the darkness and cold of that first night. At the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson indeed welcomed them with coffee and cake. She chatted happily while they ate, clearly delighted to have Lucas visiting. When they finished, Lucas stood to leave. "I should get back to the ranch," he said. "We have got an early morning tomorrow." Louisa walked him to the door. In the hallway, away from Mrs. Henderson's cheerful presence, the air felt charged again. "Thank you for checking on me," Louisa said softly. "I will be in town again on Saturday," Lucas said. "If you would like, I could show you around a bit. Help you get to know the place." "I would like that," Louisa said, and knew from the way his eyes lit up that she had given the right answer. "Saturday, then. I will come by around 2 o'clock. I will be ready." He left, and Louisa closed the door behind him, leaning against it with a smile she could not suppress. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the dining room doorway, her eyes twinkling. "That Lucas Garrett is a fine young man," she said innocently. "Very fine indeed." Louisa just smiled and said nothing, but her heart sang with anticipation for Saturday. The next few days fell into a pleasant rhythm. Louisa taught during the day, finding her confidence growing as she got to know her students. They were good children, just as everyone had said, though some of the older boys could be challenging. She learned their names and their personalities, figuring out who needed encouragement and who needed a firmer hand. In the evenings, she ate supper with Mrs. Henderson and the other boarders, then spent time in her room planning lessons or reading. But no matter what she was doing, part of her mind was always counting down to Saturday, to seeing Lucas again. When Saturday finally arrived, Louisa took extra care with her appearance. She wore her blue dress, the one that brought out her eyes, and spent longer than usual pinning up her hair. Mrs. Henderson noticed, of course, and smiled knowingly but said nothing. Lucas arrived exactly at 2 o'clock, riding his bay horse and leading a gentle-looking mare. "I thought we could ride out a bit," he said when Louisa came outside. "See some of the country around here, but only if you are comfortable riding." "I am comfortable," Louisa assured him. The truth was she had not ridden much, but she was not about to miss this opportunity. He helped her mount, his hands strong and steady on her waist, and they set off together at an easy walk. Lucas led them out of town and into the rolling prairie, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the area. "The Graham Ranch is about 10 miles that way," he said, gesturing west. "We run cattle mostly, but Mr. Graham has been talking about bringing in some sheep too. Some folks think that is a bad idea, mixing the two, but I think it could work if it is managed right." "You are the foreman?" Louisa asked. "Yes, for 3 years now. I started working for the Grahams when I was 16, just doing general ranch work. But Mr. Graham, he saw something in me, I guess. Taught me the business side of things, not just the cowboy work. When old Frank Mercer retired, Mr. Graham made me foreman. Some of the older hands were not happy about it at first, me being so young, but we worked it out." There was no boastfulness in his words, just simple fact. Louisa found she liked that about him, the quiet confidence without arrogance. They rode for a while in comfortable silence, and Louisa realized she felt completely at ease with him. It was strange, really. She had known him less than a week, but something about Lucas made her feel safe and understood in a way she had not felt since her parents died. "Tell me about your family," she asked. "Are they here in Johnson City?" Lucas's expression grew more somber. "My father died when I was 15. He was a ranch hand, got thrown from a horse and broke his neck. My mother passed 2 years after that. The fever, same as your parents. I have got a sister, Emma. She is married to a farmer up near Waco. We write to each other, but I have not seen her in a year or so." "I am sorry," Louisa said softly. "About your parents. Thank you, it was hard losing them both so young, but the Grahams, like Mrs. Simmons said, they kind of took me in. Not formally, but they made sure I was all right. Gave me extra work so I could earn more, let me stay in the bunkhouse rent-free for a while. They are good people. You are lucky to have them, and they are lucky to have you." Lucas glanced at her, something warm in his eyes. "That is kind of you to say." They rode a bit further, climbing a gentle hill. At the top, Lucas pulled his horse to a stop, and Louisa did the same. The view spread out before them was breathtaking. Miles of prairie rolling away in all directions. The town of Johnson City, a cluster of buildings in the distance. "This is beautiful," Louisa breathed. "I come up here sometimes when I need to think," Lucas said. "It helps, seeing how big everything is. Makes your own troubles seem smaller somehow." They sat there on their horses, side by side, and Louisa felt a contentment settle over her that was entirely new. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, she realized. Not just in Johnson City, not just teaching at the school, but here on this hill with this man. Louisa, Lucas said, his voice uncertain in a way she had not heard before. I know we have not known each other long, but I would like to call on you properly if you would be amenable to that. I would like to get to know you better, her heart soared. I would like that too, Lucas, very much. His smile was like the sun coming out. Yeah, she said, matching his grin. They rode back to town as the sun started to sink lower, talking and laughing, making plans. Lucas would come by after church on Sunday. He would take her to the church social next month. They would ride out again when the weather was nice. When they reached the boarding house, Lucas helped her down from the horse, and this time his hands lingered a moment longer on her waist. They stood close together and Louisa could feel the warmth of him. Thank you for today, she said. I had a wonderful time. So did I, Lucas said. I will see you tomorrow at church. I will be there. He touched her cheek gently, just a brush of his fingers, but it made her breath catch. Then he mounted his horse and rode away, and Louisa watched him go with her heart full of something that felt dangerously close to joy. That night, lying in bed, she thought about how strange life was. A week ago, she had been alone on a dark road, frozen and frightened. Now she was here, settled in a new town with a job she loved, and a man who made her feel things she had never felt before. All because Lucas had found her that night and given her his coat. Keep it, he had said, and she had. She still had his coat hanging on her door, and now she wondered if he had known even then that he was giving her something more than warmth. A promise, maybe. A beginning. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, the cold snap finally breaking. Louisa dressed for church in her best dress, a dark green wool that she had saved carefully. She pinned up her hair and took extra care with her appearance, telling herself it was just because it was Sunday, not because she knew she would see Lucas. Mrs. Henderson walked to church with her, chattering happily about the sermon they were likely to hear and who would be there. The church was a small white building with a tall steeple, and by the time they arrived, it was already half full. Louisa felt curious eyes on her as they took a seat near the middle. The new teacher was still an object of fascination. She was looking around, trying to memorize faces and match them to the names of her students' parents, when the door opened and Lucas walked in. He was cleaned up, wearing dark pants and a white shirt, his hair neatly combed. He looked young and handsome and a little nervous, and when his eyes found hers, his whole face lit up. He made his way to her pew and asked quietly, "May I sit with you?" "Please," Louisa said, moving over to make room. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and she was intensely aware of his presence through the entire service. She tried to focus on the minister's sermon about kindness and charity, but her mind kept wandering to the man beside her. His hands, strong and calloused from work, resting on his knees. The way he sang the hymns in a pleasant baritone. The warmth that seemed to radiate from him. After the service, several people came up to introduce themselves and welcome Louisa to the community. She met the Grahams, David and Martha, who were indeed kind and welcoming. Martha was a plump woman with intelligent eyes who looked at Lucas with obvious affection. "So you are the young lady Lucas pulled out of the cold," she said warmly. "We are so glad you are here, dear, and do not worry about keeping Lucas's coat. He has plenty of them." David Graham, a tall man with graying hair, added, "Lucas tells us you are doing well at the school. The children are lucky to have you." "Thank you," Louisa said, flustered and pleased by their warmth. When the crowd cleared, Lucas turned to her. "Would you like to take a walk? It is too nice a day to waste indoors." They walked together away from the church, down the quiet Sunday streets. Most folks were heading home for Sunday dinner, and they had the town largely to themselves. "The Grahams seem lovely," Louisa said. "They are. They have been good to me." Lucas glanced at her. Mrs. Graham has been hinting that I should settle down and start thinking about getting married. She worries I work too much and do not have enough of a personal life. And do you work too much? Maybe, he admitted. But I like the work, and until recently I had not met anyone who made me want to make time for anything else. Louisa felt heat rise in her cheeks. Until recently. Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her. They were on the edge of town now, near the small creek that ran behind the last row of houses. Until a week ago, when I found a half-frozen teacher on the road and gave her my coat. That was a good thing you did, Louisa said softly. Best thing I ever did, Lucas said, his gray eyes intense on hers. Because it brought you into my life, Louisa. They stood there looking at each other, and Louisa felt like the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. She wanted him to kiss her, she realized with a shock. She barely knew him, and she wanted to feel his lips on hers. But Lucas was a gentleman. He just smiled and offered her his arm. Come on, let me walk you back before Mrs. Henderson starts to worry. They walked back in comfortable silence, and at the boarding house door, Lucas touched his hat and said, I will see you soon. Soon, Louisa agreed and watched him walk away. The weeks that followed were the happiest Louisa had known in years. She taught during the week, growing more confident and capable with each passing day. Her students were responding well to her, even the older troublesome boys. She was making a difference, she could feel it, and that filled her with deep satisfaction. And there was Lucas. He came into town as often as his work allowed, which was usually twice a week. They would walk together, or ride out into the countryside, or sit on Mrs. Henderson's porch and talk for hours. They talked about everything, their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Lucas told her about his plans for the future, how he hoped to one day have his own ranch. Louisa told him about her parents and her childhood, about how she had always wanted to teach. You are good at it, Lucas said. I can tell. The children in town, when I see them, they talk about Miss Ravenwood and how nice she is and how much they are learning. That means more to me than you know, Louisa said. As November turned into December, their relationship deepened. Lucas held her hand when they walked. He brought her small gifts, a book he thought she would like, a pretty hair ribbon from the general store, wildflowers that still bloomed despite the season. She found herself thinking about him constantly, missing him when he was at the ranch, counting the hours until she would see him again. She was falling in love with him. She knew it, felt it in every fiber of her being. And from the way he looked at her, the way he touched her so carefully and reverently, she thought maybe he felt the same way. One Sunday in mid-December, they were walking by the creek after church when Lucas suddenly said, Louisa, I need to tell you something. Her heart jumped. What is it? I am in love with you, he said simply, turning to face her. I have been for weeks now, but I did not want to rush you or scare you off. But I cannot keep it to myself anymore. I love you, Louisa. I love your kindness and your strength and your laugh. I love the way you care about your students. I love everything about you. Joy flooded through her, so intense it almost hurt. Lucas, I love you too. I think I have since that first night when you gave me your coat and told me to keep it. His smile was brilliant. Really, really, she said, laughing through sudden tears. He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close, and Louisa felt like she had finally come home. This was where she belonged, she thought. In Lucas's arms, in Johnson City, building a life and a future. Louisa, Lucas murmured into her hair. I know it is too soon to ask properly. We have only known each other 6 weeks, but I need you to know that I am serious about you, about us. I want a future with you if you will have me. She pulled back just enough to look up at him. I want that too, and I do not think it is too soon. Sometimes you just know. Sometimes you just know, he agreed, and then, finally, he kissed her. It was everything a first kiss should be, tender and sweet and full of promise. Louisa felt like her heart might burst with happiness. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling like fools. "We should probably head back before we scandalize the whole town," Lucas said reluctantly. "Probably," Louisa agreed, but neither of them moved. They stood there by the creek, wrapped in each other's arms, making soft promises about the future. They would court properly for a few months, Lucas said. He wanted to do this right, wanted to give her time to be sure. But then, maybe in the spring, they could get married. He would talk to Mr. Graham about building a small house on the ranch property for them. Louisa could keep teaching if she wanted, at least until they had children. The word hung in the air between them, full of hope and possibility. "I want that," Louisa said. "All of it, with you." They walked back to town hand in hand, both of them glowing with happiness. Mrs. Henderson took one look at them and smiled knowingly but asked no questions. That evening at supper, though, she announced to the other boarders, "I believe we are going to have a wedding in this town come spring." Mr. Porter and Mrs. Simmons looked delighted and offered their congratulations. Louisa blushed and said nothing, but she could not stop smiling. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Lucas came to town every Sunday after church without fail, and often one other day during the week. They were the talk of Johnson City, the new teacher and the young foreman, but it was all good-natured gossip. Everyone seemed genuinely pleased for them. At Christmas, Lucas gave Louisa a beautiful cameo brooch that had belonged to his mother. She gave him a watch chain she had saved up for and had engraved with his initials. They spent Christmas Day with the Grahams, who treated them both like family. Martha Graham pulled Louisa aside at one point and said, "I am so happy for you and Lucas. He is like a son to us, and we have worried about him being alone, but he lights up around you, dear. You are good for each other." "He has made me happier than I ever thought possible," Louisa admitted. "Hold on to that," Martha advised. "Life can be hard out here, but if you have love, you can weather anything." As winter turned toward spring, Lucas started building their house. It was small but sturdy, with 2 rooms that could be expanded later. He worked on it every spare moment he had, with help from some of the other ranch hands. Louisa would ride out on Saturdays to see the progress, marveling at how it was taking shape. "It is perfect," she would say, and Lucas would grin and pull her close. They set the wedding date for April 15, 1883. It would be at the church in Johnson City, with a reception at the Graham's ranch. The whole town was invited, and everyone was excited. Louisa had written to Lucas's sister Emma, who promised to come with her husband and 2 children. Mrs. Henderson was helping Louisa sew her wedding dress, a simple but elegant white gown. Everything was coming together beautifully. A week before the wedding, Lucas came into town with something bundled in his arms. He found Louisa at the schoolhouse after classes let out. "I have something for you," he said, his eyes twinkling. He unwrapped the bundle to reveal his old canvas duster, the one he had given her that first night. But it had been transformed. It had been cleaned and mended, the canvas waxed to waterproofing again. Inside, sewn into the lining, was a soft fleece that would provide extra warmth. "I wanted you to have this," Lucas said. "For real this time, not just borrowed. I had Mrs. Graham help me fix it up so it fits you better. I want you to keep it always, Louisa, to remember that night when we met." Louisa felt tears sting her eyes. "Lucas, it is perfect. I will treasure it always." "That night changed my life," Lucas said seriously. "I was riding back to the ranch, cold and tired and not thinking about much except getting home, and then I found you and everything changed. You changed me, Louisa, made me want things I had not let myself want before, a wife, a family, a real home." "You changed me too," Louisa said, touching his face gently. I was so alone, Lucas. Even before my parents died, I felt like I was just going through life without really living it. But with you, everything is vivid and real and wonderful." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Louisa felt the familiar thrill run through her. One more week, she thought. One more week and they would be married and she could finally be his completely. The night before the wedding, Louisa lay in her bed at the boarding house, too excited to sleep. Tomorrow she would marry Lucas Garrett. Tomorrow her whole life would really begin. She got up and went to the wardrobe, pulling out the coat. She wrapped it around herself, breathing in the faint scent of leather and Lucas that still clung to it. Keep it always, he had said that first night. And she had. And now she was keeping him too forever. The wedding day dawned perfect and beautiful, the Texas sky a brilliant blue and the temperature warm but not too hot. Louisa woke early, her stomach fluttering with nervous excitement. Mrs. Henderson and several ladies from town came to help her get ready, doing her hair in an elaborate updo with flowers woven through it, helping her into the wedding dress. When Louisa looked at herself in the mirror, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy and radiant and in love. "You are beautiful, dear," Mrs. Henderson said with tears in her eyes. "Lucas is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Louisa said. The church was packed when they arrived. It seemed like the whole town had turned out, along with many folks from the surrounding ranches. Lucas stood at the front with the minister, looking nervous and handsome in a new suit. When Louisa started down the aisle, his face transformed, love and wonder shining in his gray eyes. Mr. Graham walked her down the aisle, having volunteered for the honor since Louisa had no family. He placed her hand in Lucas's with a warm smile, and then it was just the two of them, standing before God and their community, making vows that would bind them together for life. "I, Lucas Garrett, take you, Louisa Ravenwood, to be my wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I, Louisa Ravenwood, take you, Lucas Garrett, to be my husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and cherish you for all the days of my life." They exchanged simple gold bands, and then the minister pronounced them husband and wife. Lucas kissed her, sweet and tender, and the whole church erupted in applause. They walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, and Louisa felt like she might float away from happiness. The reception at the Graham Ranch was joyous and lively. There was food and music and dancing. Lucas's sister Emma was there with her family, and she embraced Louisa warmly, welcoming her to the family. The Grahams gave a toast, wishing them every happiness. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears into her handkerchief. Lucas danced with Louisa again and again, holding her close, whispering in her ear about how beautiful she was and how much he loved her. As the sun set and the party continued, he leaned down and murmured, "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Garrett, Mrs. Garrett?" The name sent a thrill through her. "Yes," she said. "Let us go home." They said their goodbyes and rode out to the little house Lucas had built. It was dark when they arrived, but Lucas had arranged for lanterns to be lit inside, giving it a warm glow. He lifted Louisa off her horse and carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing. Inside, the house was simple but cozy. There was a main room with a kitchen area, a table and chairs, and a comfortable couch. A doorway led to the bedroom, where a large bed covered in quilts waited. The Grahams and some of the ranch wives had furnished it for them as a wedding gift. Lucas set Louisa down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you," he said. "I am going to spend every day of the rest of my life making you happy." "You already make me happy," Louisa said, reaching up to kiss him. "Every single day." They stood there in their new home, kissing and holding each other, and then Lucas swept her into his arms again and carried her to the bedroom. The door closed softly behind them, and Louisa gave herself to her husband completely, joyfully, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Their wedding night was everything Louisa had hoped for and more. Lucas was gentle and patient, making sure she was comfortable and happy. They explored each other slowly, learning what brought pleasure, murmuring words of love. When they finally came together fully, Louisa felt a completeness she had never known before. This was right. This was perfect. This was home. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Lucas's arms around her, her head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "I have never been happier in my entire life," Louisa said honestly. "You have given me everything, Lucas. A home, a family, a future. Love. You have given me the same," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I spent so many years just working and getting by, not really thinking about what I wanted beyond that. And then I found you on that road, and suddenly I knew. I wanted you. I wanted this. A wife to come home to, a house that is really a home, maybe someday children running around causing chaos." Louisa laughed. "Someday soon, maybe." "Maybe," Lucas agreed, sounding pleased. They talked quietly into the night, making plans and sharing dreams. Lucas wanted to save money and eventually buy his own ranch, maybe a small spread to start with that they could build up over time. Louisa wanted to keep teaching for a few more years, at least until they had children. They talked about how many children they wanted. Lucas said 3 or 4. Louisa said 2 or 3. They compromised on 3, and what they would name them. Eventually, they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, content and deeply in love. The next morning, Louisa woke to find Lucas already up, making coffee in the kitchen. She pulled on her dressing gown and went to find him. He was standing at the stove, barefoot and shirtless, and she took a moment to just appreciate the sight of him. Her husband. Her Lucas. He turned and saw her, and his face lit up. "Good morning, Mrs. Garrett." "Good morning, Mr. Garrett," she said, going to him. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly. "I like waking up with you here," he said against her lips. "I like it too." They had breakfast together, and then Lucas had to head out to work. Louisa spent the day settling into the house, unpacking her few belongings and arranging things to her liking. Mrs. Graham came by in the afternoon with a basket of supplies and spent a few hours visiting. She gave Louisa advice on everything from cooking to gardening to managing a household, and Louisa soaked it all up gratefully. When Lucas came home that evening, dusty and tired from a long day of work, his whole face transformed when he saw Louisa. She had supper waiting, and they ate together at their little table, talking about their days. It was so simple and ordinary and absolutely perfect. That became their routine over the following weeks. Lucas would work on the ranch during the day, and Louisa would teach at the school. They had agreed she would keep teaching at least through the end of the school year in June. She would ride into town each morning and ride back in the afternoon, a 10-mile round trip that she grew to enjoy. Lucas worried about her making the trip alone, but she assured him she would be fine. In the evenings and on Sundays, they were together, learning how to be married, building a life. They had their small disagreements, of course. Louisa thought Lucas worked too hard and did not take enough time to rest. Lucas thought Louisa worried too much about her students and brought her work home too often. But they talked through their differences and always made up thoroughly, in bed or on the couch, or once memorably against the kitchen counter. As spring turned into summer, Louisa began to suspect she might be pregnant. She was tired all the time, and certain smells made her nauseated. She waited a few more weeks to be sure, and then one evening in June, she told Lucas over supper, "I think I am going to have a baby," she said, watching his face carefully. Lucas went very still. Then slowly a smile spread across his face, growing wider and wider until he was beaming. "Really? You are sure? Pretty sure?" "I will go see the doctor in town tomorrow to confirm it, but all the signs are there." Lucas stood up so fast his chair fell over. He pulled Louisa into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "A baby! We are going to have a baby!" Louisa laughed, holding on to him. "Are you happy?" "Happy. I am over the moon, Louisa. This is the best news I have ever gotten." He set her down carefully as if she might break. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to sit down? Should you be on your feet?" "I am fine," Louisa assured him, amused by his sudden protectiveness. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am not made of glass." But Lucas continued to fuss over her, insisting she sit while he cleaned up from supper, asking her 20 questions about how she felt and what she needed. Louisa found it endearing, even as she rolled her eyes at his overprotectiveness. The doctor confirmed the pregnancy the next day. The baby would be born sometime in January, he said. Louisa was healthy and strong, and he saw no reason why everything should not go smoothly. When Louisa told Lucas the news was official, he was so happy he looked like he might cry. "A baby in January," he kept saying. "Our baby." They told the Grahams, who were thrilled and immediately began making plans to help. They told Mrs. Henderson and the people at church. Everyone in Johnson City was excited, offering congratulations and advice. Louisa taught the summer session at the school, but she and Lucas agreed she would not go back in the fall. She would stay home and prepare for the baby, and after the birth, she would see how she felt about returning to teaching. It was a difficult decision because Louisa loved teaching, but she also wanted to be there for her child in those early years. As the months passed, Louisa's belly grew round with their baby. Lucas was constantly touching it, marveling at the life growing inside her. When the baby started to kick in September, he spent an entire evening with his hand on her stomach, his face filled with wonder every time he felt movement. "That is our child," he would say in an awed voice. "Our son or daughter." They spent hours discussing names. If it was a boy, Lucas wanted to name him after his father, Robert. Louisa agreed, though she wanted the middle name to be Lucas. Robert Lucas Garrett. If it was a girl, Louisa liked the name Catherine, after her mother. Lucas suggested they make the middle name Marie after his mother. Catherine Marie Garrett. As fall deepened into winter, they prepared the house for the baby. Lucas built a cradle, working on it in the evenings with painstaking care. Louisa and Martha Graham sewed tiny clothes and blankets. They were as ready as they could be. In early January 1884, almost exactly a year after Lucas had given Louisa his coat on that cold, dark road, she went into labor. It was evening and Lucas had just come home from work. Louisa was making supper when the first pain hit, strong enough to make her gasp and grab the table. Lucas was at her side in an instant. "Is it time?" "I think so," Louisa said breathlessly. Lucas turned into a whirlwind of activity. He got Louisa settled on the bed, then rode like the wind to get the doctor and Martha Graham, who had agreed to help with the birth. Within an hour, the house was full of people and activity. The labor was long and hard. Louisa had heard women talk about childbirth, but nothing had quite prepared her for the reality of it. The pain was intense, coming in waves that seemed endless. But through it all, Lucas was there, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, telling her how strong she was and how much he loved her. "You can do this," he kept saying. "You are the strongest person I know, Louisa. Just a little longer." Finally, after hours of labor, as the sun was rising on a cold January morning, their baby was born. A boy, healthy and squalling with a shock of dark hair. "You did it," Lucas said, tears streaming down his face as the doctor placed the baby in Louisa's arms. "You did it, Louisa. He is perfect." Louisa looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and waving fists, and felt a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. "Hello, Robert," she whispered. "Hello, sweet boy." Lucas leaned down and kissed her forehead, then gently touched the baby's head. "Robert Lucas Garrett," he said softly. "Welcome to the world, son." The next few weeks were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Robert was a good baby for the most part, but he needed constant attention. Louisa was tired in a way she had never been before, but every time she looked at her son or at Lucas holding him with such tender care, her heart filled to bursting. Lucas was a devoted father from the start. He would come home from work and immediately take Robert so Louisa could rest. He learned to change diapers and soothe the baby's cries. He walked the floor with Robert at night when the baby was fussy, singing soft songs in his deep voice. "You are a natural at this," Louisa said one evening, watching Lucas cradle their sleeping son. "I never knew I could love something this much," Lucas said, looking down at Robert with wonder. "Except for you. I did not know I had this much room in my heart." "Me either," Louisa said. "But I am glad we found out together." As Robert grew, he became the center of their world. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh. He had Lucas's gray eyes and Louisa's blonde hair, and both his parents thought he was the most beautiful child ever born. The seasons turned, and their lives settled into a new rhythm. Lucas continued to work hard at the ranch, but he always made time for his family. Louisa found that while she missed teaching sometimes, she loved being a mother even more. She took Robert with her into town for errands, and everyone loved to see the baby. When Robert was about 6 months old, Lucas came home one evening with big news. "Mr. Graham wants to retire," he said. "He and Mrs. Graham are getting older, and they want to move into town, take it easier. He has offered to sell me the ranch." Louisa stared at him. "The whole ranch, the whole thing. Buildings, land, cattle, everything. He is giving me a very fair price, and he said I can pay him over time. It is an incredible opportunity, Louisa. This is what we have been dreaming about." "Can we afford it?" Louisa asked practically. "Just barely," Lucas admitted. "We will have to be careful with money for a few years, but I have been saving, and with what Mr. Graham is asking, I think we can do it. What do you think?" Louisa looked around their little house, at Robert sleeping in his cradle, at Lucas's hopeful face. "I think we should do it," she said. "I think this is our chance to build something really special." Lucas's smile could have lit up the night. "You are sure?" "I am sure." "We will make it work, Lucas. Together." They bought the ranch, and suddenly Lucas was not just the foreman but the owner. It was a huge responsibility, but he rose to the challenge. He worked harder than ever, managing the cattle operation, dealing with buyers, hiring, and supervising ranch hands. Louisa helped where she could, managing the household accounts and sometimes riding out to help with smaller tasks. It was not always easy. There were times when money was tight, when the cattle prices dropped, or when unexpected expenses came up. There were droughts and storms and sick animals. But through it all, Lucas and Louisa faced everything together, supporting each other, never giving up. 2 years after Robert was born, Louisa became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier and she felt better throughout. In December 1886, she gave birth to a daughter, Catherine Marie, called Katie by everyone. She had Louisa's blue eyes and a temperament that was sunny from the start. Lucas was just as smitten with his daughter as he had been with his son. He carried Katie everywhere, showing her the ranch and telling her stories even though she was too young to understand. Robert, now a sturdy toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. They were a family, complete and happy, building a life on the ranch that was all theirs. As the years passed, their life continued to grow and change. The ranch prospered under Lucas's management. He had a knack for the business, knowing when to buy and sell, how to manage the land and the cattle for maximum benefit. By the time Robert was 5 and Katie was 3, they were comfortable financially, no longer scraping by but genuinely prospering. Louisa occasionally missed teaching, and when Katie was old enough to not need constant attention, she started offering lessons at the ranch for Robert and Katie and a few children from neighboring ranches. It was not formal schooling, but it kept her connected to education and made sure her own children got a good start. In 1889, when Robert was 5 and Katie was 3, Louisa found herself pregnant again. It was a surprise, but a happy one. Their third child, a boy they named Thomas David after David Graham, was born in August. He was a calm baby, easygoing and content, and he completed their family. Lucas and Louisa agreed that 3 children were plenty, and they focused on raising them and building the ranch. The children grew up wild and free, learning to ride before they could barely walk, helping with age-appropriate chores, playing in the creek and the hills. They were ranch children through and through, sturdy and independent and happy. Robert was serious and responsible, even as a young child. He followed Lucas everywhere, learning the ranch business, asking endless questions. Katie was bright and cheerful, with a quick mind and a love of books that reminded Lucas of Louisa. Thomas was quiet and observant, with a gift for working with animals. Lucas and Louisa watched their children grow with pride and love. Their marriage remained strong, built on a foundation of respect and genuine affection. They still talked for hours, still made each other laugh, still came together with passion despite the demands of raising 3 children and running a ranch. On their 10th wedding anniversary in April 1893, Lucas gave Louisa a present. It was a new coat, beautiful and well-made, lined with soft fur and clearly expensive. "Lucas, this is too much," Louisa protested, even as she ran her hands over the soft fabric. "No, it is not," Lucas said. "You have been wearing that old duster of mine for 10 years. It is time you had something nicer." "But I love that coat," Louisa said. "It is special to me." "I know," Lucas said gently, "and you can keep it. But you deserve something beautiful too, Louisa, something that shows the world how special you are." Louisa put on the new coat and it fit perfectly, beautiful and warm. But later, alone in their bedroom, she pulled out Lucas's old duster from the back of the wardrobe. It was worn now, the canvas faded, the lining patched in several places. But it still smelled faintly of him, and it still held all the memories of that first night. "Keep it always," he had said. And she had. And she would for the rest of her life, as a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing of seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Robert grew into a serious young man, passionate about ranching and determined to follow in his father's footsteps. Katie became a voracious reader, talking about maybe becoming a teacher like her mother had been. Thomas remained quiet but showed incredible skill with horses, training them with patience and gentleness. Lucas and Louisa grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They weathered challenges together. A bad drought in 1895 that nearly broke them financially. An illness that struck Katie when she was 12 and terrified them both until she recovered. The normal difficulties of raising 3 strong-willed children. But they also celebrated triumphs. The year the ranch finally turned a really significant profit, the children's accomplishments and milestones, the simple everyday joys of working side by side and falling into bed exhausted but content each night. In 1900, on their 17th wedding anniversary, they took a rare day off together, leaving the children with Martha Graham, who still lived in town with her husband, both of them healthy and spry in their 70s. Lucas and Louisa rode out to the hill where he had first told her he wanted to court her properly, all those years ago. They stood together, looking out over the land that was theirs now, the ranch they had built through hard work and determination and love. "You ever regret it?" Lucas asked quietly. "Giving up teaching, tying yourself to this life to me?" Louisa looked at him in surprise. He was 42 now, with threads of gray in his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But he was still the man who had found her on that dark road, still the man who had given her his coat and told her to keep it. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. This life, this ranch, our children, this is everything I ever wanted, Lucas. Everything and more." "I love you," he said, pulling her close. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing on that road, shivering in the cold. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Louisa said, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Always." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for everything they had been given and everything they had built together. As the new century began, their children started to make their own ways in the world. Robert, at 16, was essentially running much of the ranch alongside Lucas. He was mature beyond his years, responsible and hardworking. Katie, at 14, had announced she wanted to go to college in Austin to study education, following in her mother's footsteps. Thomas, at 11, was still young but already showing signs of wanting to work with horses professionally. Lucas and Louisa supported all their children's dreams, even when it meant letting them go. When Katie left for Austin in 1902, Louisa cried, but she was also proud. Her daughter was going to have opportunities she herself had never had. Robert stayed on the ranch, and when he was 21, he married a sweet girl from Johnson City named Sarah. Lucas and Louisa welcomed her into the family with open arms, and within a year, they were grandparents to a baby girl named Emma after Lucas's sister. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Lucas looked at Louisa with wonder in his eyes. "Can you believe it? We are grandparents." "I can believe it," Louisa said, smiling at how natural Lucas looked with a baby in his arms again. "And you are going to be just as wonderful at this as you have been at everything else." The years continued to roll forward. Katie graduated from college and got a teaching position in Austin, eventually marrying a lawyer named Peter and having 2 children. Thomas worked with horses, gaining a reputation as one of the best trainers in the state, and eventually married a rancher's daughter named Mary. Lucas and Louisa saw all their children settled and happy, and they took deep satisfaction in that. The ranch continued to prosper, and eventually, Lucas began to hand more and more responsibility to Robert, stepping back and taking it easier. In 1910, on their 27th wedding anniversary, Lucas and Louisa sat together on the porch of their house, watching the sunset. They were in their 50s now, slowing down but still healthy and active. Their grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter filling the evening air. "It has been a good life," Lucas said, taking Louisa's hand. "The best life," Louisa agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "Do you remember that night?" Lucas asked. "When I found you on the road, of course I remember. How could I forget? It was the night my life really began." "Mine too," Lucas said. "I still have that coat, the one I gave you. I know. It is in our wardrobe. I see it every day." Louisa squeezed his hand. "You told me to keep it always, and I have, just like I have kept you and our love and all the beautiful things we have built together." "Always," Lucas said, lifting her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. They sat there together as the sun set, their hands intertwined, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built. The ranch, the house, their children and grandchildren, the love that had sustained them through everything. It had all started with a cold night, a frightened woman, and a cowboy who gave her his coat. But it had grown into something so much bigger and more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. A love story for the ages, played out against the wild Texas landscape, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the simplest acts of kindness. And through all the years, through all the joy and sorrow and daily routine, Louisa kept that coat. It hung in their wardrobe, a tattered reminder of where they had begun. Sometimes she would take it out and hold it, breathing in the faded scent of leather and memories, remembering the young woman she had been, and the man who had saved her in more ways than one. "Keep it always," he had said. And she had kept it, and him, and the love they had found on that cold November night in 1882. As the years advanced further, Lucas and Louisa settled into the comfortable rhythm of older age. They had lived through so much together. The hard early years of building the ranch, raising 3 children, weathering droughts and economic downturns, celebrating triumphs and mourning losses. Through it all, their love had remained constant, a bedrock foundation that everything else was built upon. By 1915, Lucas was 60 and Louisa was 58. They had passed the day-to-day running of the ranch entirely to Robert, though Lucas still rode out occasionally to check on things. Mostly they spent their days in quieter pursuits. Lucas would sit on the porch and work on small projects, mending tack or whittling toys for the grandchildren. Louisa kept busy with her garden, her reading, and the endless parade of visitors, children, grandchildren, neighbors, and friends. They had 8 grandchildren now, ranging from baby Peter, Katie's youngest, to 13-year-old Emma, Robert's eldest daughter. The house was often full of noise and laughter as the grandchildren came to visit. Lucas loved teaching them to ride and rope, passing on his skills. Louisa baked cookies and told stories and made each grandchild feel special and loved. Their own health remained good, though they both had the usual aches and pains of age. Lucas's knees bothered him sometimes, especially in cold weather. Louisa's eyesight was not what it used to be, requiring spectacles for reading. But they were blessed with generally robust constitutions and good spirits. On quiet evenings, they would sit together on the porch, holding hands and watching the stars come out. Sometimes they talked, reminiscing about the past or discussing family news. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. "I was lucky," Lucas said one evening, "to find you that night, to have you choose me." "We were both lucky," Louisa corrected gently. "And I did not just choose you, Lucas. I chose us, the life we could build together. But you made the first choice when you stopped and helped me instead of riding on by." "How could I have ridden by?" Lucas said. "You needed help, and something in my heart recognized you, I think." "Recognized that you were meant to be mine," Louisa smiled. "That is very romantic for an old rancher." "I am romantic about you," Lucas said simply. "Always have been." In 1920, they celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary with a big party at the ranch. All 3 of their children came with their families. The Grahams, both now in their 90s, came from town. Friends and neighbors from all over the county attended. It was a joyous celebration of a marriage that had endured and flourished. At the party, Robert stood up to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us all what love looks like. You built this ranch with your own hands and your own sweat. You raised us with wisdom and kindness. You showed us that marriage is not just about the big moments, but about showing up for each other every single day. We love you both." There was not a dry eye in the house. Lucas pulled Louisa close and kissed her, not caring that everyone was watching. She kissed him back, her heart full of love and gratitude for this man and this life. As the 1920s progressed, Lucas and Louisa began to slow down more noticeably. Lucas's hair was fully gray now, and he moved more carefully, his joints stiff with age. Louisa's blonde hair had faded to white, and she tired more easily than she used to. But their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other burned as bright as ever. They talked sometimes about the end, about what would happen when one of them died. It was not a morbid conversation, just practical. They both agreed they wanted to be buried together in the small cemetery outside Johnson City, near Lucas's parents and Louis's friends. "I do not want to be without you," Lucas said one day. "I do not know how to be in this world without you, Louisa." "You will not have to be," Louisa said firmly. "We will go together or near enough that it makes no difference. We have been together for so long now, I think our souls are intertwined. Where you go, I will follow soon enough." It was Lucas who fell ill first. In the winter of 1925, he developed pneumonia. He was 69 years old, and while he fought hard, his aged body could not shake the illness. Louisa sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him, refusing to leave even when their children begged her to rest. On a cold January night, almost exactly 42 years after he had given her his coat, Lucas opened his eyes and looked at Louisa with perfect clarity. "I love you," he whispered. "It has been the honor of my life to be your husband." "I love you too," Louisa said, tears streaming down her face. "You are the best man I have ever known, Lucas Garrett. You saved me that night, and you have saved me every day since." "No," Lucas said softly. "You saved me. You made my life worth living, Louisa. You and our children and this life we built. I have no regrets. None." Those were his last words. He closed his eyes and slipped away peacefully, with Louisa holding his hand and their children gathered around. Louisa was devastated by his loss, but she was also grateful. They had had 42 years together, years filled with love and laughter and hard work and triumph. Not everyone got that. They had been blessed beyond measure. She insisted on helping to prepare his body for burial, washing him gently and dressing him in his best suit. When they buried him in the cemetery, the entire town turned out. Lucas had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. After the funeral, Louisa went home to the ranch house and took Lucas's old coat out of the wardrobe. She wrapped it around herself and sat in his chair on the porch, crying for the man she had loved more than life itself. Their children worried about her, but Louisa assured them she was all right. She was sad, yes. She missed Lucas with every fiber of her being. But she had known this day would come eventually, and she was determined to live out her remaining years with the same strength and grace that had characterized her whole life. She stayed on the ranch, living in the house she and Lucas had shared for so many years. Robert and his family lived nearby, checking on her daily. Katie came to visit frequently from Austin. Thomas stopped by whenever he was in the area. The grandchildren, many of them now grown with children of their own, visited often. Louisa spent her days tending her garden, reading, writing letters, and remembering. She would sit on the porch in Lucas's chair, wrapped in his coat, and think about their life together. The memories brought both tears and smiles. She lived for 3 more years after Lucas's death, and while she missed him every moment, she found peace in knowing they had made the most of their time together. She took joy in her children and grandchildren, in the ranch that she and Lucas had built, in the community that had embraced them both. On a spring evening in May 1928, Louisa went to bed as usual. She was 71 years old, healthy for her age but tired. She fell asleep thinking about Lucas, as she did every night, remembering the feel of his arms around her and the sound of his voice saying he loved her. She did not wake up. She died peacefully in her sleep, and her children said it was a blessing. She had lived a full life, loved and been loved, and in the end, she had simply gone to sleep and slipped away to join her husband. They buried her next to Lucas in the cemetery, and the whole town turned out again, just as they had for him. At the funeral, Robert spoke about his parents' love story, about how a chance encounter on a cold night had led to a lifetime of devotion. "My father gave my mother his coat and told her to keep it always," Robert said. And she did. She kept it for 46 years, long after it was worn and faded, because it was not really about the coat. It was about what the coat represented: kindness, generosity, love. That was my parents' legacy, not just to us but to everyone who knew them. They showed us how to love well, how to build a life together, how to face challenges with courage and joy. On Louis's gravestone, next to Lucas's, their children had inscribed a simple epitaph: "Together always, from a cold November night in 1882 to eternity." The ranch passed to Robert and eventually to his children, remaining in the family for generations. The story of Lucas and Louisa became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The old coat, carefully preserved, was kept as a family treasure, a tangible reminder of where it all began. And in Johnson City, Texas, people still talked about the cowboy and the schoolteacher, about the love story that had started with a simple act of kindness on a dark, cold road. It became the kind of story that gave people hope, that reminded them that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that sometimes the smallest gestures led to the greatest rewards. Years later, when Lucas and Louis's great-grandchildren asked about them, they would hear the story of that November night. They would learn about the frightened young woman and the kind cowboy, about the coat that was given and kept, about the love that grew from that first meeting into something that shaped multiple generations. And they would understand that true love was not just about passion or romance, though Lucas and Louisa had certainly had both. True love was about choosing each other every day, about building a life together through hard work and compromise, about facing challenges as a team and celebrating triumphs together. It was about small acts of kindness that grew into something profound and lasting. Lucas Garrett and Louisa Ravenwood had lived ordinary lives in many ways. They were not famous or rich or powerful, but they had loved each other deeply and truly, and they had built something beautiful together. A family, a ranch, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And it all started with a coat on a cold night and a simple command: keep it always. She had kept it. She had kept him. She had kept the promise implicit in that gift, to be his as he was hers forever and always. That was their story. A Wild West love story for the ages, rooted in the harsh beauty of Texas, nurtured by hard work and devotion, and lasting long beyond the lives of the two people at its center. It was a reminder that the best love stories are not always the most dramatic or complicated. Sometimes they are simply about two people who found each other and chose, every single day, to build a life together. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for than that? A love that lasted a lifetime, a family that carried on the legacy, and the memory of two people who had loved each other well. Lucas and Louisa Garrett, together from that first cold night until death parted them, and beyond, in the hearts and memories of all those who came after. Their story lived on, a testament to the enduring power of love, kindness, and the choices we make in the darkness that shape our lives in the light. The old coat still hung in the family ranch house, preserved under glass now, with a small plaque telling the story. Visitors to the ranch, which eventually became a historical site, would read the plaque and look at the worn canvas with wonder, touched by the romance and simplicity of it all. And on cold November nights in Johnson City, when the wind swept down from the north and the temperature dropped suddenly, people would think of Lucas and Louisa. They would remember that sometimes the coldest nights lead to the warmest futures, and that true love can be found when you least expect it, on a dark road in the middle of nowhere, with a simple act of kindness. "Keep it always," he had said. And those words had come to mean so much more than just keeping a coat. They had come to represent the promise of forever, the commitment to hold on to love through all the years and challenges, to treasure what truly mattered, and to never let go of the people and moments that made life worth living. That was the legacy of Lucas and Louisa Garrett, and it endured long after they were gone, a beacon of hope and love for all who came after. Their story proved that the best things in life often come from the simplest beginnings, and that a cold night, a frightened woman, and a generous cowboy could be the start of something truly magnificent. And so their story ended where it began, with a coat and a promise and a love that would last not just for one lifetime, but for all the lifetimes that followed, echoing through generations, reminding everyone who heard it that love, real love, is the greatest gift we can give or receive. Always.